Hey guys, welcome to this first lecture in the materials section of this course. And in this first section, we're going to go over the materials panel, which is located right here. And as you can see, I'm back in Blender with the default Blender setup here with the cube in the middle. Now I'm not going to go over all the options, but I will go over most of them. And we're basically just going to create something that can go on this cube using just the settings in this panel to tweak the shading, the highlights, things like that. And I'll try to cover all the options that I think you guys are going to find useful. So let's start up here. You can name your materials here. Let's just type in cube material right now. And whenever you have an object selected, you can assign it here with this plus and minus icon. You can assign multiple materials to an object and tweak them here. So this little section here is going to allow you to specify how you preview the material. So you have options for plane, sphere, cube, the monkey head that we talked about earlier, particle strands for things like hair or grass, and then you've got this custom sky background here. And so primarily you're going to want to keep it under something relatively simple so you can kind of see what it's going to look like when it bends around curvatures and things like that. But that's pretty much it for the preview. So let's go over these four options you see right here. Usually you're going to leave this on surface, and what these four options are going to do is allow you to change what type of material you're going to be generating for your objects. So if you leave it on surface, it's only going to affect the actual surface of the mesh you're working with. Wireframe will, of course, only show the edges for your material here, and it's great for doing wireframe overlays for your model and things like that. Volume is what you're going to use when you're trying to create something that something like smoke is a great example of something where you would use volume to kind of give something shading that's made up of something that's not solid. And then finally you've got this halo option, which is a kind of a way to take the points that make up your object. You can see these vertices here that are on all parts of the cube, and it'll kind of create this little glow here that you can tweak. So let's go back to surface, and I haven't changed anything. We're just going to go ahead and render this, and as you can see, I've got just a basic flat shaded cube. And so if I come in here to this color right here, just like under the lights, if I tweak this to be another color and then render it again, it's going to turn to that color. I can change how intense that diffuse color shading is there. And then this ramp option will allow you to actually assign a color that fades from one side to the next with the material. So I'm going to turn them back off. Specularity is going to change the highlights that you see on your model here. As you can see, this is a kind of a round highlight that fades off a little bit with this effect here, feathered out. The hardness will affect how tight that reflection and that highlight is. So the hardness value here, the higher you go, the tighter that's going to be. And the intensity here will affect how bright the highlight is, and of course you can always tint that highlight a little bit off-white to accommodate your diffuse color there. So again, with a simple object like this, you're not going to see a lot of change because there's not a lot of geometry. So let's actually go in, get rid of that cube. Let's create a UV sphere instead. We'll smooth this out real fast. And let's go ahead and we're back in the materials panel. Let's use this drop down and throw that material that we've been working on back onto that sphere. Let's render again. Okay, so now you can kind of see that highlight there. I'm gonna zoom this camera in so we got a better view there of that sphere. Okay. So let's bring this back down to something like 120, and there you go, it's a nice little highlight. Okay, let's go over the shading tab. The shading is going to control certain things like emission, which is whether or not the material is going to actually generate light itself. So if you crank this up a little bit and we render it, you can kind of see that it'll create an object that's kind of glowing, and that's good for certain things if you need an object that has that. Ambient will control the amount of ambient light that's actually going to hit this object. So what this does is if you go over to the world settings here and you look at this ambient color, right now it's all the way down to black. So even with this turned all the way up, nothing's going to happen because you're just going to get a black spill onto the material. So if that's our render and our ambient color is instead something that is like orange, and we render this, you can see what this does. It adds kind of a spill from the background light onto the material itself. So if you crank this down, it's going to apply less of that, and then of course all the way back down to 0, it's going to be back to where it was. So handy to know. And then this last slider here is translucency, which kind of affects how much you can see through the backside of your material. So think of things like seeing through objects that are hit from sun from behind, like grass. They kind of have a glow to them. And to really get this to pop, you'd need a light behind the material that kind of shows through this to get that effect. And so that's pretty much it for the shading tab. The one other thing I'll cover is the shadeless button. If you check this off, it's going to take all the shading off your model and just leave you with a solid flat color. This can be useful if you're bringing in background plates or matte paintings and you're applying those to an object and you don't want the lights in your scene to affect any of these materials. So be aware that that's there, and it can be useful. So let's crank this all the way back down, and let's move on to transparency. So I'm going to re-render that. Okay, now transparency will give you a few options. You've got mask, Z transparency, and ray trace. You're probably only ever going to use Z transparency or ray trace for most of your needs. Z transparency is going to use kind of a faster algorithm that we talked about, similar to how you would use buffer shadows instead of ray trace shadows with your lamps. So if you have Z transparency checked and then you bring your alpha down a little bit, you can see in the preview it's going to let that background start showing through. So you can see that. If I go into the 3D view and I create some more objects here and we have those in view, then with the transparency turned on, you can see how you can see through the object there. And so you can control the overall transparency and bring that all the way down to 0, render that, and as you can see, you've still got your specular highlights going. The specular slider will take those down as well if you need those to be down or off. So got to be aware of. And then of course over here you've got some of the Fresnel options, which are kind of nice if you want to create some effects where the material as it tapers off to the edges will respond to light differently. So as you can see there, we got kind of a bubble effect going on by turning that Fresnel value up, and the shading is really only affecting the edges as the light hits them. You can change some of how that works with this blend value here. Turning that up will of course give you a little bit more of a blown out effect there. If you bring this back down and then turn this blend up, you can be a little more subtle with that, something like that. And again, Z transparency is good if you want speed. Ray trace is what I usually use because it'll give you a little bit more options down here for how you control things. If we turn this Fresnel back down, then we've still got this alpha, and it's going to take a little longer because again it's going to use those ray trace algorithms. But it'll allow you to also control things like index of refraction. This is handy if you know a specific transparency index for a material that you're creating. So for example, glass is 1.44, I believe. So if you render this and you're trying to create something with a transparent glass effect, if you bring your alpha all the way down to 0, it's going to distort the light as it enters this object, and then kind of give you a reflection and a bending that you would see if you were looking through something that was made out of glass. So you can look these up on the web. It's pretty simple to find a complete list of things that you can use for different kinds of materials you're creating, and I would recommend that. Now, something you can also do is turn up this depth here, and it's going to give you a little bit better reflections when you're bouncing these rays around on the inside of these objects. So if you're getting a little bit of a result that's unexpected and you think it should look a little different, keep in mind that if this depth setting is set to something really low, you may be getting something a little weird because you don't have enough rays on the scene. So turn that up, and you'll get a different result. So that's going to be it for the transparency. Mirror is going to be how much reflectivity the material actually transmits back when it receives those from the ray trace. So if you turn this up even a little bit, you can see in this preview it's now reflecting this environment around it. To kind of demonstrate this, we'll need to have a few more of these around the scene just so you can see some reflections. So go ahead and get these ready. And so as you can see there, we've got a nice little reflection there. And of course, the higher you make this, the more mirror finish you'll have. And you can also change the color of the reflectivity. So if you've got an object that's a little more green, then I would recommend pulling that diffuse color sort of into the reflectivity where you've got this going on. Now again, we've got depth, we've got Fresnel settings, and so it will bend. This is good for something like car paint, where when you're looking at it straight on, it's pretty flat, but then as it tapers off to the edge, you've got, excuse me, as it tapers off to the edge, you've got those reflectivities coming in on the side, as you can see here. So pretty handy, nice quick way to do something like car paint like that. And again, you got your blend settings, and depth as always, turn that up, get some better reflections. And then your gloss will change how clear this image is that it's reflecting. So let's bring this Fresnel back down so we've got some more clear reflections all over the model. So as you can see, these are pretty crystal clear. They're not blurred, not anything like that. If you change this gloss value even down to something like 0.99 and turn that on, and you render this now, you're going to start seeing these get a little bit more noise involved, like this. And you can bring this all the way down to have reflections that are still there, but are very scattered. And it all depends on the kind of material that you're trying to generate. So you play with that setting and get a lot of different effects right there. And so that's about it for the mirror. Now I'm going to skip subsurface scattering, strands, and options. Some of these things are a little more advanced when you get into doing things like texturing humans, things like that. You may want to get back in here and explore these, but they're a little bit outside the scope of this course. So the last thing I'll cover is the shadow menu. Just a couple of options to be aware of in the shadow menu. If we've got this default rendering back, some of these may affect how the material is generated if you're building a certain kind of material. So right now we've got receive on, and what that's going to allow all of these materials to do is receive shadows. So we haven't got any shadows turned on in the scene. Let's take this lamp. Instead, let's make it something like an area lamp. Let's take distance down to 10, and we've got ray shadow on. Let's crank the samples up to something like 6. Pull this up a little bit. And then soft size, let's make that something like a 5. Okay, so pretty hot. Let's pull that back. Like a 0.1. That's a lot better. Okay, now we go in here and we've got these set to smooth, but I'm going to go ahead and add a subdiv modifier just to give us a little bit more geometry to work with on that one, and it'll come off a little smoother than the rest of these. So, all right, let's look at some of the other settings for this shadow box down here. Now, if we turn off receive, it's not going to receive any cast shadows from other objects. Receive means that it's able to receive those ray trace shadows. So if I have this cube or this sphere over here, and it's in front of the light source casting a shadow down onto that sphere, we render this. Bring this into view here. Okay, got a little bit of that shadowing. You can see the noise there. Our lighting is really soft. That's why you're seeing that that noise. So let's bring this down to something like 2 or even 1, and then render. And now you can see we got a much harsher shadow going on here. So I'm actually going to shrink this down a little bit so it's not completely covering the sphere. But there you can see that cast shadow. So if I've got that shadow showing, then if I turn receive off, now it's not going to be able to receive that shadow. Receive transparent is useful if you've got transparency showing for a material, and those shadows are being cast through that material onto the other surface. If you turn receive transparent on, it's going to be able to cast those shadows onto the other surface. So turning that off will leave you without any of those transparent shadows there. Cast only is used if you only want to allow the material to cast shadows but not receive them. Cast buffer shadows is going to allow or disallow you to use buffer lamps. If you're using buffer shadows for your lights, that's something to be aware of. Cast approximate is again something you're going to be using when you're using approximate rendering instead of ray trace rendering, which we'll get into when we get into rendering. And so just be aware that if you're trying to do something specific, sometimes you can come into this shadow menu or the options menu, and you're going to find some options that will allow you to do really specific things within your material settings. So that's going to wrap it for the materials panel. Things again will change depending on the kinds of things you have selected and the materials for objects you have going. So be aware of that. And in the next lecture, we're going to go over how to use textures, which are right here, to enhance the materials that we've been building in this section. So I will see you there.